Good afternoon and welcome to GGNA's webinar, Using Productivity Standards to Drive Major Gift Success. My name is Jill McDonald and I'll serve as your host for today's webinar. In this session, we will review the foundation of prospect tracking systems, how to measure major gifts officer productivity, detail the contributing factors to success, performance standards, and potential challenges, and define best practices for a yearly work plan. Eloise Sturr will serve as our presenter today. Eloise, a GGNA Vice President and Managing Director, has more than 30 years' experience in institutional advancement and most recently served as Associate Vice Chancellor for University Development and Alumni Relations at Vanderbilt University, where she played a role in leading the university's $1.75 billion Shape the Future campaign. She also has held senior roles with the Pennsylvania State University, University of Oregon Foundation, and Whitman College. Since joining GGNA, clients she has served include the Carter Center, University of Kansas, University of Notre Dame, The Ohio State University, and Villanova University. Following our presentation, there will be a 15-minute question and answer session. If you'll look on the right-hand side, there's a chat function, and you can go ahead and send in your questions that way. And at this point, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Eloise Sturr.
Jill, thank you very much. And again, welcome to all of those who have joined the webinar. I think that we have a pretty timely topic given the tough economy in which to raise major gifts. Fundraising, from what I can see, is very much in the fishbowl at all organizations. And so this is, I hope, an opportunity for you to plan for and be able to defend your fundraising results. So as Jill mentioned, in order to look at the productivity standards for major gift success, we're going to touch on those slides which you see before you, the points which you see before you right now. We're going to start with a look at the prospect tracking system. It is the foundation of accurate tracking and efficiency. Major gift work is inherently inefficient, so let's try to get efficiency where we can. Next, we'll discuss measuring major gift officer productivity, why it's important and how you do it, contributing factors to success, different performance standards, where they apply, and potential challenges and obstacles for generic measurement standards. And lastly, we'll talk about best practices for a yearly work plan. So who should have these performance standards? Well, my quick answer is pretty much everybody. That is everybody from the most senior to the most junior. These are generally measurements that are easily fulfilled by development officers as they go about their work. But there are a lot of distractions in all development jobs, as you know, so we need to make sure that someone is watching out for the major gift officers to be doing the right things and those right things steadily throughout the year. We all know of programs where stars are worn because a big gift came in, rather than recognizing the stars who are doing all the right things for the short and for the long run. So I hope that these metrics give you a way to keep major gift officers focused and always building the pipeline for the future. And again, I think it's important to think about these metrics being applicable to everyone, that they're not punitive in any way, but rather give major gift officers the chance to be successful. So let's start with a brief discussion of the prospect tracking system. It's the foundation of tracking productivity and new activity. I think it's how major gift officers know what their focus of work should be at any given time. And further, I find that it's the key to get major gift officers to articulate strategies, which isn't always easy. And it's also a key to highlight context by the prospect manager and others throughout the institution. In the end, it allows for more transparency for all the staff to see. So what is a prospect tracking system? It's a data bank of prospects and donors who are actively engaged with the university, the college, the school, the medical center, the NGO, the cultural organization. whatever your entity is. It allows for a manager to be assigned to each of those prospects and donors with a past or potential history of giving. Most systems require a qualification visit by the gift officer before an assignment of a prospect is made. That qualification visit sets the stage for the first strategy on engaging the donor. And then after the first qualification visit and when requesting the assignment, the major gift officer should be required to articulate a strategy. Most importantly, a prospect tracking system gives the major gift officer a chance to capture work with the prospect and work by all of the institution again, throughout the stages from cultivation to solicitation to stewardship. The system should allow the major gift officer to manage and maximize the donor's relationship with the institution. The system should also require of major gift officers that they articulate a strategy. Again, this is quite important on all major gift prospects. Importantly, and I'll talk about this more in a few minutes, the prospect tracking system should have a process in place for discussion around any new prospects. The system should allow the major gift officer to manage and maximize the donor's relationship with the institution. It should really be seen as a tool. Again, not as something that is confining, but rather allows the major gift officers to be much more effective. Now to look at guidelines and to review and expand upon what I said about the prospect tracking system. I also want to suggest that a key for a strong prospect tracking system is some fluidity and timeliness. This isn't something that you set in place and keep on a shelf, and it isn't something that you update every year. It's not a group of people which stays the same year after year. If it does, then something is clearly wrong. So the guideline here is that you would expect in a portfolio of prospects in a prospect tracking system that there would be about 15 to 20% annual turnover. You try to see that that prospect pool is fairly evenly distributed between evaluation, the prospects being in the evaluation stage, stages of earlier advanced cultivation and solicitation and stewardship. And you would look to see that about a quarter of them, nearly a quarter, are in the advanced cultivation and solicitation stage. Standard prospect tracking system allows you to better focus your resources on major gift prospects. It tracks face-to-face visits as a fundamental principle and tenet of it. And by face-to-face visits, I mean appointments that truly deepen the prospect's relationship by educating, updating, and inspiring that prospect, not fly-by-night visits or quick visits, visits that really enlighten the major gift officer on the prospect's interest or capability. They almost always help to advance toward a gift or to learn if the prospect clearly is not interested in a major gift at this time. The prospect tracking system permits coordination across multiple areas and information sharing. It's certainly a repository for prospect information. So let's talk a little bit about what the individual prospect pools for major gift officers should be. So you see there that we've indicated that it's different for different categories of major gift officers or gift officers. For principal gift officers, we're suggesting that it be 15 to 75. For major gift officers, 100 to 125. For planned giving officers, a slightly lesser number, 75 to 100. And for leadership annual giving officers, 200 to 225. And again, you can see that for corporate and foundation relations, 60 to 75. Now, I think those of you who haven't done this for a long time, these numbers may strike you as fairly limiting, but certainly in my experience, no one is able to handle more than these guidelines effectively. So again, one of the things we want to make sure is that we don't set ourselves or the major gift officers up to fail. Setting realistic targets and giving major gifts officers the tool to succeed is our job. One caveat to consider as you look at those prospect pools is how long has the development officer been in the position? These numbers are clearly ones that suggest someone who has had a year to build a portfolio. Another obvious question would be, well, what do you do if you are near the top of your range? If you're a principal gift officer, say, and you have 75, My suggestion is that you think about triage. You look at those who are truly not engaging, those that are never going to give, and you give them back to the pool. You may be in a position where you can suggest to another major gift officer that that person would be more effective or maybe has more capacity to take on prospects. Particularly at big shops, but really everywhere, there needs to be a civil, transparent, orderly, and public way to ask for assignments. Ask for a prospect to be reassigned from someone else to you, and to move prospects out that are not being contacted. This memo that you see is just a sample, just a reminder that you need to be able to have some standard language to indicate when a prospect is being added to a system and when a prospect is being dropped from the system. Particularly important, obviously, when someone's being dropped from the system, that you have fairly standard language so that the next major gift officer coming along doesn't reinvent the wheel and try and engage the prospect when, in fact, there's good reason to believe that that prospect's not going to be interested. You'll want to make sure that one person has a key responsibility, the prospect tracking system. Depending on the size of your institution, it may or may not be a full-time job. In addition, you may want to have a management committee or a revolving committee of gift officers that looks at the prospect assignments every 2 weeks to make sure that the assignments are fair and appropriate. I'd advocate that all assignments be treated with the same system, whether they're leadership, principal gift prospects, corporate prospects, or plan giving prospects. Again, it allows for a transparent and orderly way in which the prospects are being dealt. So this is a sample of a contact email that would go out, again, every 2 weeks or every week, which would show who has requested which prospects as assignments, and gives the staff a chance to advocate for a different decision or to add their 2 cents as to, even in some cases, as to strategy. So we've talked about the prospect tracking system. Let's talk for a few minutes about measuring major gift officer productivity. You can begin to track individual major gift productivity, I think, once you have the prospect tracking system in place. Performance standards are designed to raise performance levels and raise more money. Ideally, they tell the gift officer what is to be done and what a good job looks like. Too many development shops don't ever tell the development officers how they can be successful and what a good job looks like. The performance metrics we're going to discuss are largely related, but not exclusively related to effort and good planning rather than luck. So it builds a structure so that major gift officers can be successful. They can make themselves successful and not just hope that some big bequest designated long ago arrives. At a minimum, institutions need to clearly document expectations based on meaningful prospect contacts, which again, by that I mean face-to-face visits, approved and delivered proposals, adherence to yearly goals, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but does include as a necessary component dollars raised, and then overall quality of work, which again we'll cover in a few minutes, but it allows for the uniqueness of each major gift officer's position and responsibilities. So let's first talk about meaningful prospect contact. And as we go through this, I mean to suggest that these are not just lofty goals, but these are actually minimum standards. And that, again, that they are established to give staff a performance standard and to keep longtime staff inspired to keep generating new prospects and soliciting new gifts. Gift officers who have significant program like alumni relations or communications and or personnel management responsibilities shouldn't be expected to have the same level of donor contact as those who are full-time face-to-face fundraisers. Generally, a full-time fundraiser is expected to make 15 face-to-face significant contacts per month or 180 per year. This means scheduled, focused conversations which are in pursuit of a donor commitment or acknowledgement. I say acknowledgement because calls that are stewardship calls on major gift donors really should count. They are an important ingredient in major gift productivity. In fact, I think one of the main problems that we see in many development programs is the lack of focus on stewardship. With staff changes, staff turnover, and a hurry to show good numbers, stewardship is often the forgotten element. We need to make sure that our measurement of major gift productivity does not forget that element. Those who manage a unit at a major university generally would be required to make 12 face-to-face contacts per month or 144 per year. I'll go into other factors that pose challenges for some of those numbers in a little bit. Those development officers who have no one to help them write proposals, no central resource for proposal writing, are often challenged to meet these expectations I just mentioned. Rather than reduce the expectations of major gift officers, I think it's important for managers to see if they can develop a resource rather than lowering expectations. For proposals, that resource can be a central bank of proposals that focus on the institution's strategic priorities, or generic scholarship proposals that can be tailored to donors, or generic endowment proposals, again, that can be tailored to a specific donor interest. So the 15 face-to-face visits per month is for major gift officers without management responsibilities. If their portfolio is largely principal gifts, which is highly unusual, but it does happen, then the expectation would be reduced to six face-to-face visits per month. Another important variable is the type of prospect that the gift officer has in her portfolio. High-end annual fund prospects are inherently less complicated. They generally are willing to give within existing institutional priorities, perhaps even unrestricted. So a lengthy discussion on options and with institutional leadership is generally not needed. So the bar is a little bit higher for major gift officers who are dealing with lead gifts to the annual fund, that is 18 contacts per month. Let's talk about the composition of a prospect pool. We're going to cover alumni, former patients or patient family members, parents, corporations, foundations, patrons, and or friends. Prospect pool composition matters to your performance standards. So for example, what if you have mostly alumni in your prospect pool? Well, to generalize, they are fairly responsive in that they spent formative years at the school or the college or the university, but often they have no great sense of urgency. Yet we know that in fundraising, deadlines are hugely important. You increase your odds of success if you have deadlines for your donors, and to the extent that you have deadlines that are immediate or long-term or campaign-related, that can help you shape what your prospect pool capacity should be. If you have a very compelling and urgent project, you may want to take on more prospects and deliver more proposals in any given year. Grateful patients and their families, and also parents of current students, are often only interested in making a major gift during a more finite period of time. Usually it's within 18 to 24 months of treatment for grateful patients and their families. Parents are usually, almost always, only major gift prospects during the years when their children are enrolled. Some universities have taken to starting major gift conversations even before the student has arrived on campus, although hopefully after the student's been accepted. So major gift officers who have a great number of parents or grateful patients in their portfolios may likely need metrics that relate to the high turnover of their portfolios. Corporate and foundation gift officers typically are not expected to make many face-to-face visits. Foundations often take no appointments, and corporations often want to make site visits in groups. Other variables that you might want to think about when you're thinking about prospect pool composition is whether or not your donor pool has had a substantial history of donor engagement, whether your institution has neglected stewardship, whether or not there are a lot of suspects who need a lot of you'll need to do a lot of cold calls to generate new prospects, and whether or not it's a mature program with a substantial history of donor engagement. So feeding the pipeline. This is important, I think, and feeding the pipeline comes from high-end annual gifts, it comes from research, it comes from screening, it comes from a lot of different factors. But major gift officers need to see this as a primary part of their responsibility to find new prospects. Identifying new prospects is something that often doesn't get measured by development offices. In the end, I've never been quite sure why that's the case, because every time an institution thinks about a campaign, everyone wants to know who the new prospects are, where the new blood is. So I think you want to keep it as a priority, and one way to do so is to expect major gift officers to identify 15 to 25 new prospects each year and to add to their portfolios. Here's a chart that outlines the 5 generally accepted stages of engagement and can help the development officer balance his or her work throughout the year. Again, we want to talk about a quarter of the activity ideally being in the evaluation and advanced evaluation and solicitation. You may want to pick different levels, but again, here's an example of how you can, from month to month, as a major gift officer or as the manager of that major gift officer, see if there's a fairly even distribution. That lets you help feed the pipeline. It helps you understand whether or not you are on track with the number of solicitations that are going to make you successful throughout the year. Here's another chart, which is really geared more for the managers and takes a slightly different look at assignments by job type and geography. It can help managers determine if they are covering the entire waterfront. So if you see, it seeks to equate the standards that we've talked about in terms of portfolio size for the different categories of major gift officer, but it also looks at whether or not geography is being handled and whether or not there's responsibility for volunteers in the portfolio of that major gift officer. Let's move on to the second and very important measure of major gift productivity. Are major gift officers asking for gifts? And let me remind you of something I'm sure others remind you of often, and that is the number one reason why donors don't give, it's because they weren't asked. There's a famous quote that people like to cite by Sandy Weill as to why he gave his first $100 million gift to Cornell. He was asked, why did you make this gift? His answer, because we were asked. You need to expect that all major gift officers will prepare and deliver proposals. Again, I see over and over that programs do not emphasize or track written proposals. The problem with this approach is that it doesn't strike donors as very professional, it doesn't get donors to remember what you asked of them, and it doesn't articulate the proposed contract between the hospital or the school or the organization with the donor. As you've often heard, the number one reason the donors don't give is that they haven't been asked. And if it's a verbal ask, the prospects most often don't think or can't remember that they've been asked. I think it's astonishing the number of times that prospects and donors have been asked. When it's a verbal ask, they literally don't take it seriously or they don't remember it very well. The flip side of this is you want to make sure that you're not encouraging major gift staff to send proposals relatively indiscriminately. And that is a danger of a shop with tight metrics that are too one-dimensional. So you want to look at a conversion rate on proposals of 50 to 65%. And that amount would have been higher 2 years ago, but we think in light of the economy that reducing it to 50 to 65% is appropriate. We probably need to be more aggressive about asking those donors who may not be inviting the proposals, but are ready for them and are willing to consider them. So if a conversion rate, again, of 50 to 65% would be considered successful. If it's a much higher rate, then you need to look at whether or not you're being insufficiently aggressive. You're not really giving your donors the opportunity to fund the projects that are so important. And if it's lower, I think you need to be checking to see whether or not it's an indiscriminate delivery of proposals. So here's a sample chart that could be produced on a weekly or a monthly basis just to let managers know, or in fact, the major gift officer, him or herself, the number of proposals delivered and to whom they were delivered. And they also see if that prospect was one of the prospects on the goal-setting list for the year. You'll see in the right-hand side goal-setting prospect. We're going to talk a little bit about goal-setting in a few minutes, so I'm asking you to note that, and we'll refer to it again in a few minutes. Adherence to yearly goals. An important tenet in this is that yearly goals should be driven by the major gift officer. Again, I go back to getting the major gift officer in a position of power to be able to determine success through his or her effort. That it not be a system of measuring productivity that is based entirely on luck or external factors that the major gift officer really cannot control. Sometimes those work out really well for people, but sometimes they don't. And again, it's a tough environment right now, and we want to be pretty careful that we make sure that we're measuring the right things. So let's talk about a goal-setting process. Run through a goal-setting exercise. Let's say GG&A University is planning its year ahead, the first year of a capital campaign. It's been raising $50 million a year and knows that in order to support the proposed campaign, it should be raising $60 million next year. So it sets up clear expectations for major gift officers to be productive. Those are the metrics we've been talking about. Metrics for each type of gift officer, including those with significant management portfolios. So before the year begins, those metrics are put into a goal-setting plan that ties the individual expectations to the needed success of the development operation. In essence, a goal-setting process so that major gift officers who are meeting the metrics are raising money for the right things and hitting institutional targets. Again, you want to be focusing the individual gift activity, their numbers, with where it is that money should be raised. Here's a quick run-through. Then, GG&A University asks its major gift units to draft a blueprint for the year. These major gift units need to work from the ground up. That is, they need to look at what their area has been raising historically, particularly in the last few years, what is in the pipeline, what is relatively automatic. For example, and I don't mean to disrespect the annual fund in this, but annual fund money is often very consistent. So it's relatively automatic for the major gift unit to expect something from the annual fund. Another category would be gifts that are in probate expected to come to the organization within the next year. So you look at what's been raised historically, what's in the pipeline, what's automatic, and then what other major gift officers, especially those that are colleagues, those who are in plan giving or in corporate and foundation relations, what they're planning to do to help with the goals for that unit. A good goal-setting process uses both major gift performance standards and the institutional expectations for private philanthropy to set an annual goal, and it gets everyone working together. The major gift officer in cancer working with the annual giving office and the plan giving office to set their annual goal for cancer. So the goal is built from the flow or relatively automatic money plus the major and principal gift prospect ask. Again, go back to proposals that are being delivered, the expectations for proposals that are to be delivered. Look at the proposals that are already in the hands of donors and project that maybe 50 to 65% of those will be funded at some level. At the end, GG&A University has a projected goal that is populated with specific asks. Next, let's look at dollars raised. So I think of this as a potentially controversial slide. I say that because, in a sense, it does include that luck factor, which I'm trying to take out of these metrics. So I present this with two cautionary notes in addition to that, and one is that it's really only for experienced hires. So in shops where you're hiring people who have no development experience, it is probably too high a bar. This is for people who are hired with maybe 3 to 5 years experience. And secondly, it's probably important to average this over a few years, even though it is year specific, so that you're not too swayed by the big bumps, and also to count you also don't then entirely count the big gifts where the major gift officer wasn't a factor, but you factor in gifts where the major gift officer was an important team member, maybe not the only person who made it possible, but one of a solicitation team or a stewardship team or the proposal development team. So I think it's potentially controversial, but I also think it's important to run these numbers, especially in this environment where we have a lot of people looking to the development programs. Obviously, a number of development offices are being slated for cuts, so we want to make sure that we can actively judge our cost effectiveness, that we can demonstrate to management that, in fact, there's a fair return on each development officer who has been hired. So we talked about targeted prospect embedded in the year's financial goals. So of the list of major gift prospects or principal gift prospects that are on that goal-setting list, another important metric is to make sure that you're judging that they actually get to that list, that target list. So I'm saying that you should expect major gift officers to solicit 70% of those who are on his or her goals list. That is the list of prospects, again, that are ready to be solicited in the year. And if I were here in your shoes, I'd say, well, why wouldn't it be 100%? Experience is that 100% is just impossible. Too many times our best laid plans don't work out because the donor's life changes, or in fact the project changes. The donor gets a divorce. The donor decides to buy a new business, and that's a good thing, but it's not means that the donor is not at all liquid and needs to put off making a big gift. Or maybe it's internal in that the physics building that was going to be built is put on hold. There are just too many factors that mean that that no one gets to 100%. Now, I would say that you want to be contacting 100%, but what I'm talking about here is soliciting 70% of those who you expected to solicit. And you need to, every day, let major gift officers work in teams to be donor-centric. You need to think about things like, who does the donor really want to see? Is it the gift officer with the dean, or is it just the major gift officer, or the major gift officer with the plan giving officer? You don't want to, within your goals, be so rigid that it is only in one major gift officer's responsibility or interest to cover that relationship in the solicitation, because our best work is generally done in teams with quite a few people involved. So next we're going to go to a sample report, and I'm going to go through this one in a little bit more detail because I think it's potentially hard to read or hard to interpret. This is a chart that it rolls up the goal setting for a particular area or maybe for the entire institution. But these categories overlap. So it's not meant to be straight addition. And if you try and work that out, you'll notice that not only does this chart not work, but anyone that you try and create. So in this example, we have $1.7 million that, as you begin the year, that are pending. And you've said that you are going to ask for $3.3 million with new solicitations. So you have a total potential pool, if nothing just comes in the door automatically, of $5 million. And so of that, you think that it's reasonable to assume that $1.1 million might come in. Now, but also in that cash goal is probably going to be some money that is not major gift money. And so that includes annual fund money, for example, which would be a portion of it. So again, it's not straight addition, not straight division. The new pledge goal Again, you're estimating that there would be $3.5 million in new pledges that would arrive that you could count during the future fiscal year. Some of those pledges may have pledge payments during the year, and so that goes into the 1.1, and some do not. But still, it's important. That new pledge goal is going to be very important to, particularly to the CEO, the dean, who's trying to project what new money has been signed and is irrevocably given to the institution. Again, the planned giving goal, you're extrapolating what you think is going to come in during the current year. So you've got $1.2 million there. Some of that's going to be in cash, because obviously you're going to include gift annuities under cash, but it also might include bequest provisions that are revocable. The special purpose goal is where you want to make sure that by the end of the year, you have raised X amount for a particular project. So again, to use the physics building example, or the auditorium, or you have an endowment goal, that's where you'd put that in and you'd say, okay, this is what we think we can raise for that specific goal. And if that number is much higher than your total goal, you begin to see where you have some problems. So it's important to be able to see these, each one distinctly, but then also to, at the end, compare them with each other. So it can get a little dizzying at times. So another report. This relates to the blueprint or goals, again, for the year. The sample report is one that would come out of goal setting. So you'd know, each major gift officer will have identified all the prospect and donors to be solicited, and probably also note again the asks that are pending. So this report gives you on one sheet of paper those asks that are to be delivered, who the prospect manager is, when the proposal is to be delivered, how much the proposal is going to be, what the giving capacity is in your system. And then the last category is the last time a gift was made. And I think that this is important to include in all these reports that you're looking at often, because if that last gift date is old, as you can see in this example, some of them are, and that's quite intentional, that's a pretty cold trail. That means there are going to be a lot of steps before the proposal delivery, probably. So if you think that you're going to deliver the proposal on December 7th, you better make sure that you've made probably 2 or 3, at least, during the current fiscal year visits with that donor, so that it's not a total surprise and you're not banking on it all being done in one visit, which we know can happen, but doesn't happen that often. So this is the fourth and last category, overall quality of work. So we're going to talk a little bit about nuances. Again, the top measures that we've talked about that I think are quite standard are face-to-face visits, proposals, adherence to annual goals, and overall quality of work. And so it's in this overall quality of work that you may want to consider some or all of these. But you know you can't measure everything. So I give these to you as ones you should consider and decide if they make more sense for your organization than they would for another organization. So you want to make sure that you consider whether or not you want to log the number of contacts. There's a lot of good work that goes on anymore with email, always has gone on with letters and phone calls, but particularly a lot of donors really like to spend time in email, and maybe that's better than a visit in some cases. So you want to judge that. It can get way out of hand, obviously. A number of qualification visits, again, we talked earlier about identifying new prospects. What I'm talking about here are qualification visits. Maybe if you've got a portfolio where it's going to take a lot of qualification visits to identify new prospects, maybe you want to measure that and make sure that you recognize the good work that's being done by a major gift officer. You may want to measure the number of strategies developed and documented. It's not easy. It takes a lot of time. Sometimes it takes talking to a lot of people, a lot of program officers or faculty members or the CEO or the president. You may want to talk about measuring asks made toward identified priorities so that the fundraisers are really asking for the things that are important to others at the institution. Looking at the total number of dollars requested, the number of gifts closed, and assist. Again, we've touched a couple times on teamwork, so I want to make sure that you think about that one, because that is one that sometimes is not recognized enough. So here are some of the cries I hear from clients, as we and others here, when you institute a more rigid measurement system. You've forgotten about the donor or perceived loss of donor-centered fundraising. My answer is no, we haven't. Just because we measure contact, and productivity does not mean that we don't value the donors as people and friends of the institution. It means that we're being better stewards of our institutional obligations. Our first charge is to enhance the institution. Second complaint I often hear, it takes control out of the unit manager's hands. I think the answer to that is yes, it does a little bit. But the goal-setting process then separately puts the unit managers in control of setting goals and a plan for the year within those metrics. Third complaint, well, what if I work hard and the money brought in goes elsewhere? My answer is you managers and others need to metrics or culture, and culture is hugely important here, or performance review forms that take that teamwork into account. I also hear that metrics are tougher for those with bad prospect pools. And I do agree, it's tougher to raise a lot of money from a bad prospect pool. But again, mostly what we're emphasizing is effort and properly focused effort by the major gift officer. That allows every major gift officer to succeed. So let's talk about special circumstances, a planned giving program, for example. To be clear, I'm talking about planned giving programs that seek gifts of cash and appreciated stock for an irrevocable planned gift, gifts that provide immediate income to institutions, and revocable estate plans. Planned giving officers seek gifts that are generally used to build long-term assets of the institution, often for endowment or unrestricted, and provide donors with ways to make extraordinary gifts beyond current income, and work on gifts that are revocable and that will not provide assets to the institution before the donor's death. We need to make sure that planned giving officers who are working very closely with the major gift staff are recognized for the uniqueness of what it is they do. So here are some planned giving metrics that you might consider that are slightly different, but obviously related to some that we've talked about. Increase in dollar amounts of outright gifts from donors who've documented planned gifts. So are they able to convert donors who have made a pledge or an endowment gift, and the planned giving officer showed them the wisdom of also making a planned gift? The number of gifts in which a planned giving officer partners with the frontline gift fundraiser. So again, this goes back to teamwork to create a sophisticated double or triple ask when dealing with the major gift prospect. Looking at the planned giving officer's ability to create a pipeline of future gifts, number and dollar value. Again, a lot of times during campaigns, revocable documented bequest intentions are not put in the numbers, but they are in fact, for most institutions, gifts that will be realized at some point. Also considering the percentage of realized planned gifts that come from previously documented intentions versus unexpected gifts. So again, what's the real work of the planned giving officer as opposed to the things that just come in because they were work done long ago. So obstacles to measuring planned giving programs. Here are some of the challenges to the one-size-fits-all. Planned gifts, often just take longer to close. You're dealing with an older population almost always, and although you could say that they may have, some of them are very concerned about mortality and would have a deadline. Hopefully they don't know the date of the deadline, but they are clear that they want to get something planned, but generally it's over a pretty long period of time where they begin to think about and then close on a major gift. So you need to make sure that the planned giving program is mindful of that. You need to measure, I think as a manager, the annual investment from operating budgets against returns that will come in years later. So the planned giving programs are often a big investment in the future, as opposed to paying the light bill now. They are gifts that will help the institution for the future. You need to value gifts in present dollars or valuing expectancies with no specific dollar attached. Again, that's a separate measure, but looking at the present value of a gift rather than just the face amount or the announced amount. And again, when you're not in a campaign, there isn't too much concern about revocable intentions. They usually aren't very highlighted, but they do become hugely important during campaigns. So let's talk about another special circumstance, is corporate and foundation relation offices. And at GG&A, we count CFR activity as cash and pledges from foundations and corporations other than those closely held by families. So we're not really talking about the family foundations where they're just using a different checkbook for a gift that is really largely considered to be from an individual. And also corporate and foundation gifts that provide faculty research funds, obviously through universities, schools, colleges, but faculty research funds without contractual obligations. So I'm going to touch on the obstacles that are parallel to the ones I mentioned for the Planned Giving Office, obstacles to measuring corporate and foundation relations program. Another challenge to the one-size-fits-all. If you lump corporate and foundation officers with other major gift officers, you will regret it. You should look at measuring the annual investment from operating budget against real return to see what kind of value are we getting from our investment in this. There's often and increasingly a concern that much of the corporate and foundation office work is the work of faculty or program officers, not development officers. While there is some truth to that, it is not universally true, that often corporate and foundation grants that come in are the development officer really has quite an active role. So I think it's important to note that, to measure that, not to be terribly defensive, but to have the data in place, and also to give the corporate and foundation officers a chance to show where they have contributed, where others might not automatically know that. So in summary, I recognize I've thrown a lot at you, that all of this requires tailoring to your school, your hospital, your university, your nonprofit. But I hope it provides a foundation and some tools to start or enhance what you already have in place. Again, these are the keys. Clear, documented, transparent expectations. Expectations for individual gift officers and for the team, the unit, and the institution. You don't want this to look like something that is all on the shoulders of the individual gift officers. There should be expectations from the team, again, from the other partners at the institution that mesh well with the expectations of individual major gift officer. You need to be mindful of appropriate formal and informal rewards for all members of successful ask teams and those meeting the metrics. Too often we forget to reward all the people who are involved, and by that, I mean sometimes it is the stewardship officer who's forgotten. Sometimes it is the person who's drafted the gift agreement. There are a number of people, to say nothing of the faculty member or the doctor long ago who made that person want to give and inspired that person to give. And lastly, there should be clear consequences for those who don't meet the metrics. That it should be clear that these, again, are minimum standards, not lofty goals, not something, well, you know, let's try for that. In fact, that you expect people to meet these metrics. And it may mean that at first, if this isn't new to your institution, that you want to scale those down, you want to test it the first year and be conservative in what you expect of people to see if in fact, that they can meet them and do more. So that covers what I wanted to cover, and I think we're going to move next to questions. And so, Jill, does that mean you'll take back?
Yes, that's correct, Eloise. And we actually just had a question come in. How can or should you reward teamwork?
Well, I think I've touched on this a little bit, but my first reaction is to say often and carefully. It does take a village to raise most major gifts, from the doctor or the teacher, as I said, who inspired the gift originally, to the dean who thanked them over the years, to the many years of cultivation by the predecessor of the major gift officer, and finally solicitation by development officers, and sometimes them with others. So I'm all for rewarding everyone who played a part in the success, including the proposal writer, the gift receivers, the plan-giving administrative assistant who did the calculations, and the other development officers who arranged for tours and helped think through strategy. But I also want to say carefully, you want to reward teamwork carefully, because there's usually one or two people who stayed with the project and really made the gift close. So I want to make sure that you be sure to reward them prominently. And if you reward all equally, it will not inspire your staff to become the leaders and the movers and the shakers who close gifts. Your metrics should take the teamwork into account, and that should be in the evaluation or the monthly reports that show all the teamwork has been done. But aside from the rewards for a single gift, there should be measurements somewhere that relate to the entire team. And again, you can do that within goal setting. We have actually one client that we work with where all staff members get the same bonus, the same percentage bonus. And so everybody has a stake in trying to make everyone else successful. It wouldn't work at a lot of places, but it's an interesting idea. And you want to be thinking of what is going to make your major gift officers work together to be successful, but also to be successful as individuals.
Okay, and here is another question. Do you have any thoughts, Eloise, on how to measure the more qualitative aspects of major gifts fundraising in terms of style or tone or approach?
That, in large measure, that is the devil, and that is in the details. That is, you need to look at the contact reports of the major gift officer, because you can tell a lot from that. Some people are quite cursory about it, but most people will tell you the content, and you can see, does the contact report mesh with the strategy that's been outlined? Are the steps in the contact report, next step that's been suggested, is that consistent with the intention and the importance of that prospect? You also look at the proposals, which I think is even though there in terms of what you expect the turnover, the conversion rate to be on proposals. You look at the content of the proposal, which is a qualitative thing. Does it inspire? Is it the best work of the institution? Does it represent the institution well? So those are two things that I think are often key indicators. Obviously, when you're around people and go on calls, major gift officers, and you go on calls with them, you're going to see other qualitative aspects, but those are two areas where I'd probably jump to first.
Okay. How should management responsibilities be factored into individual expectations for activity and dollar goals?
I'm not sure I understand the question. So you're talking about a person who is a major gift officer who has who has a assigned management portfolio. Because we talked a little bit about the need to tailor the manager's portfolio, but that person should still have clear expectations as to proposals and asks and contacts, and should be very much a part of the goal-setting process. Even if that person is in a large shop as a central manager, that person should have expectations of making solicitations and bringing in money for the individual units or the CEO or the president's priority.
And the question also means that, yes, a fundraiser who is also managing professional staff.
So that person needs to, I think, is just kind of in terms of expectations, I would expect that person would make 12 contacts a month. I would expect that person would be soliciting donors, should be working with prospects on and achieving certain objectives that are embedded in the goal setting. I don't think that I have a gold standard for someone who is a manager and is also doing major gift work, which they all should be doing that. But there's a certain amount to be brought in. I think it's just too dependent on the nature of the prospect pool or the level of responsibility of the manager.
Okay. What are the components of a good contact report?
Great question. A good contact report is one which first will stand the test of time, has some archival value, that is information that is biographical about the donor who's been called. It is a concise summary of what has happened at that meeting. It is ideally also has included what the purpose of the meeting was and whether or not that purpose was achieved, and then looks forward as to what the next steps need to be in terms of strategy and who else needs to be involved. And given that most places would have the capability to do that, it ought to very clearly show who else needs to get this contact report and who, with whom it should be shared and what those people are being asked to do. I've seen contact reports that are 4 pages long that are hugely valuable in that so much was just learned during that visit, and some that are a paragraph long that tell you everything you need to know. But if the contact report really allows you to understand if the major gift officer was hit by a bus and not able to proceed with the prospect assignment, does it tell everyone what they need to know about what the prospect is now thinking and what the prospect is expecting of the institution and what should be done next by the major gift officer or the successor?
Is the last gift date on the report a major gift, or is it any gift? Does the size of the gift make a difference, or just the fact that they in fact gave?
Another great question. I think it's dependent on the institution. My preference would be that it be generally a major gift, because at a lot of institutions, complicated ones where many of you work, there might have been a $15 gift to athletics, and that just really doesn't have very much bearing. So ideally, if system allows it, it should be the last major gift.
Okay. Should we have volunteer metrics?
We should. Yes. Oh, I love that question. But pretty careful. Those are really only for very mature volunteer organizations. A number of you are probably developing volunteer committees where the volunteers are actually just starting to do fundraising and understanding what it is that they can contribute to the enterprise. But those who have mature volunteer operations, I say yes. I mean, volunteers, to generalize, are competitive people. They're used to being measured. They love it. They want to know how they can be successful. So set the metrics up so they can be successful and that they can know whether or not they're successful. I think it's a great next iteration. I'm not seeing very many places do it, and it needs to be done kindly, because these are people giving their own time, and frankly, people you can't fire. Not that you would want to anyway, but it's a win-win if done right.
Okay. We've got time for about one more question. How do you keep the human element with all of these measures?
Again, a great question. With common sense, these are internal measurements that any organization or business needs, but you don't want to get carried away. As managers, you need to know how to interpret the numbers so that you spot trends and you spot pure luck. I think it's very discouraging to major gift officers when they have managers who live and die by the numbers and really don't understand the subtleties of what's actually made a program successful or not. So I think you keep the human element by common sense, by really having good managers who understand numbers well, and also, I'm not sure this is entirely ready, but I also say these metrics are at no point to be shared with donors. That donors don't need to know that we're saying that a major gift officer should be making 15 contacts a month. That's an internal measure, and they don't need to know that, and probably would begin to feel like they were numbers. But in fact, as I said earlier, I think it's a kindness to the institution. I think it's a kindness to donors, but there will be a lot lost in translation. So keeping the human element is, I think, also involves making sure that these measures are all internal or with a very small group of very keyed-in volunteers.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Eloise, and thank you very much to everyone for attending today's session. A recording of the session as well as the PowerPoint slides will be emailed to the address that you used to register within the next 24 hours. If you have any further questions, please visit grensglier.com. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.